India's increasing reliance on African oil imports as a strategic alternative to Russian crude is a significant development in the global energy landscape. This shift reflects India's broader policy to diversify its sources of crude oil, enhance energy security, and mitigate geopolitical risks. Over the past few years, especially following the Ukraine conflict and the subsequent sanctions on Russia, India has significantly expanded its engagement with African oil-producing nations. Background: India's traditional oil imports and the rise of Russian crude. Historically, India has been heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, with countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and the UAE constituting the majority of its crude imports. However, in recent years, Russia emerged as a dominant supplier, especially after the Ukraine crisis in 2014 and more dramatically post-2022. Before the Ukraine war, Russian crude accounted for less than 1% of India's oil imports. By 2024-2025, this share surged to approximately 30 to 34%, making Russia India's single largest source of imported oil. This dramatic increase was driven by Russia's ability to offer steep discounts, sometimes up to 20 to 30%, due to its geopolitical conflicts and the global sanctions landscape. Why Africa? India's strategic shift toward African oil. While Russian crude has become a major supplier, India is not solely relying on it. Instead, it has increasingly turned to African nations, particularly Nigeria, Angola, Algeria, and other West and Central African producers. This diversification is motivated by multiple factors: energy security and flexibility. Relying on a broader range of suppliers reduces dependence on any single source, minimizing risks associated with geopolitical conflicts, sanctions, or supply disruptions. Cost advantages. African oil, especially from Nigeria and Angola, is often competitively priced, particularly during periods of global oversupply or when discounts are offered. Long-term strategic partnerships. India aims to build stronger energy ties with African nations, which are rich in oil and gas resources, through investments, joint ventures, and long-term supply agreements. Geopolitical considerations. By engaging with African nations, India balances its energy diplomacy amid the complex geopolitics involving the US, Russia, the Middle East, and China. The recent data underscores this shift. In February 2025, Indian imports of African crude oil reached approximately 330,000 barrels per day, BPD, more than doubling from about 143,000 BPD in January 2025. This sharp increase reflects a proactive strategy by Indian refiners to secure African supplies amidst fears of potential US sanctions on Russian oil, which could disrupt global oil markets. Indian refiners, including state-owned companies like Indian Oil Corporation (IOC), Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited (BPCL), and Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited (HPCL), have actively engaged with African national oil companies (NOCs). Reports indicate that Indian firms are negotiating long-term, term-based deals, some extending into 2026, to guarantee supplies and stabilize procurement costs. Nigeria has emerged as a key player in India's African oil strategy. As Africa's largest oil producer, Nigeria has been able to offer large spot cargoes and is actively seeking to deepen economic and energy ties with India. Indian companies have secured significant cargoes from Nigeria, including both spot and term deals, signaling a resurgence of African supply to India's energy mix. Nigeria's oil exports to India are facilitated by the country's production capacity, which hovers around 1.5 million BPD, and its strategic positioning within the West African region. Nigerian crude grades such as Bonny Light and Forcados are favored by Indian refiners due to their quality and compatibility with Indian refining infrastructure. India's energy security policy emphasizes diversification not only through sourcing, but also through technological and infrastructural resilience. By sourcing from Africa, India reduces its over-reliance on Middle Eastern supplies, which account for roughly 60–70% of its imports. Diversification also helps India safeguard against regional conflicts, political instability, or sanctions that could disrupt supply chains. Moreover, India's engagement with Africa extends beyond mere imports. Through investments in refining capacities, joint ventures, and upstream exploration projects, India aims to establish a more integrated energy partnership with African nations. For example, Indian Oil Corporation has invested in Nigerian oil blocks, and Indian companies are exploring opportunities in Angola and Algeria. India's Africa-centric oil strategy also has geopolitical dimensions. As the US and its allies seek to curtail Russian energy exports through sanctions and other measures, India's diversification towards Africa provides a buffer against potential market shocks. Furthermore, India's engagement with Africa aligns with its broader Act East and Neighbourhood First policies, fostering diplomatic and economic ties with African nations. Looking ahead, India is expected to continue expanding its African oil imports, potentially reaching 400,000 to 500,000 BPD in the coming years. This growth will be supported by bilateral agreements, infrastructural investments, and possibly new pipeline projects linking African oil fields to Indian ports or pipelines. Despite the promising prospects, there are challenges. African oil producers face issues like political instability, infrastructure deficits, and fluctuating production levels. Additionally, global efforts to reduce carbon emissions and transition to renewable energy sources could impact long-term oil demand. Furthermore, logistical and transportation costs, as well as competition from other Asian and European buyers, influence African countries' ability to secure stable markets for their oil. India must navigate these challenges to maintain and deepen its energy ties with Africa. India's strategic pivot toward African oil imports reflects a nuanced approach to energy security, economic diplomacy, and geopolitical positioning. While Russian crude remains a significant part of India's energy mix due to its affordability, African oil supplies are increasingly vital in providing diversification, stability, and long-term supply security. As India continues to strengthen its relationships with African nations through trade, investment, and diplomatic engagement, African oil will likely play an integral role in shaping India's energy future amidst a complex global landscape. Please subscribe to our channel and like and share.